Snow had already begun to settle across the valley when Caleb Whitmore realized how quiet wealth could be. The ranch stretched for miles, fences tracing the land like stitched seams, barns standing tall and red against the white, and a mansion that sat on a gentle rise as if it had always believed it belonged there. Caleb had built it all, piece by piece, deal by deal, risk by risk. Money had come early and stayed loyal. But something else had slipped away so quietly he hadn't noticed until the silence became unbearable. Christmas was approaching, and for the first time in years, the decorations felt like props in an empty play. The wreaths were perfect, the lights professional, the tree enormous and symmetrical, yet none of it reached his chest. It was just another season he could afford. He told himself he didn't care. Caring had cost him once. Caring had taught him lessons he didn't like remembering. So he focused on numbers, on cattle counts, on land acquisitions, on the way his influence stretched from one end of the county to the other. People spoke his name with a mix of admiration and distance. He was the rich rancher, the man who could fix problems with a check and silence them with another. That reputation followed him everywhere, even into the small town at the edge of his property where he rarely stopped anymore. On one of those rare stops, just days before Christmas, his truck idled near the old general store. The bell above the door rang as he stepped inside, the warmth and smell of pine cleaner wrapping around him. That's when he saw her. Ana Reyes stood near the counter, her coat worn thin at the elbows, her hair pulled back in a way that suggested habit rather than style. She was counting coins into a small envelope, her lips moving as if negotiating with the numbers themselves. Caleb recognized her instantly, though it took a second to place where from. Years ago, before the ranch had doubled, before his name meant anything beyond local circles, Anna had worked briefly on his land, helping in the stables when her father was sick. She had been quiet, steady, grateful without being small. The store owner's voice was gentle but firm. The heating bill was overdue. The groceries could wait, but the bill couldn't. Anna nodded, slipping the envelope back into her pocket, her shoulders tightening in a way that didn't ask for sympathy. Something in Caleb stirred, a reflex he had perfected over years. He stepped forward, pulled out his wallet, and placed a few bills on the counter without ceremony. It was an amount that meant nothing to him and everything to the problem in front of him. Anna turned, surprise flickering across her face before settling into something else. Pride, maybe. Or resolve. She shook her head. I can't, she said quietly. Caleb smiled the practiced smile that usually ended conversations. It's Christmas, he replied. Consider it a gift. She hesitated, eyes dropping to the money, then to the store owner, then back to Caleb. Finally, she accepted it with a nod, murmuring a thank you that carried weight. Caleb felt a familiar sense of satisfaction, the kind that came from solving something quickly. He left the store believing the moment was over. It wasn't. 2 days later, a knock came at the door of the mansion just as dusk settled in. The staff had gone for the evening, leaving the house echoing with its own sighs. Caleb opened the door himself, expecting a delivery or a neighbor. Instead, Anna stood there, snow clinging to her boots, her cheeks red from the cold. In her gloved hand was an envelope. I came to return this, she said, holding it out. Caleb frowned, taking it automatically. Inside were the exact bills he had given her, smoothed and carefully folded. Every penny accounted for. You didn't have to do this, he said, confusion edging his voice. It was meant to help. I know, she replied. And it did. It reminded me I can still stand on my own. But I don't keep what I can earn. There was no accusation in her tone, no bitterness. Just truth. Caleb felt something crack, subtle but unmistakable. People rarely returned his money. They built dependencies on it. They expected it. They resented it. But they never gave it back. You drove all the way out here for this? He asked. She nodded. It mattered. He wanted to argue, to insist she keep it, but something told him that would insult the very thing that had brought her to his door. So he stepped aside and invited her in from the cold. She hesitated, then accepted, wiping her boots carefully as if the floor itself deserved respect. They talked, at first about nothing important. The weather, the ranch, the town. But conversation has a way of finding its own depth when both people stop performing. Anna spoke of her work, of taking extra shifts, of caring for her younger brother since their father's passing. She didn't complain. She explained. Caleb listened, really listened, realizing how long it had been since he had done that without thinking of outcomes. When she left, the house felt different. Not warmer, exactly, but less hollow. Caleb stood in the doorway long after her car disappeared down the drive, the envelope still in his hand. For the first time in years, money felt small. Over the next few days, he found himself thinking about her constantly. Not in a romantic way, not yet, but as a question. How had she held on to something he had lost? He had given generously, donated publicly, funded programs with plaques bearing his name. Yet none of it had filled the quiet. Anna's refusal, her return, had stirred something deeper than gratitude. It had challenged him. On Christmas Eve, snow fell harder, wrapping the ranch in silence. Caleb walked through the barns, checking on the animals himself instead of delegating. He remembered simpler winters, when he had done everything by hand, when success had been an idea rather than a fortress. He remembered his mother's laugh, the way she believed Christmas wasn't about what you had, but what you gave when no one was watching. Somewhere along the way, he had started watching himself too closely. An idea formed, not grand, not public, just right. Early Christmas morning, before the sun rose, Anna heard a knock on her door. She opened it cautiously, surprised to see Caleb standing there, bundled against the cold, a modest truck behind him loaded with boxes. "I'm not here to give you money," he said quickly, as if anticipating refusal. "I'm here to ask for help." She blinked. "Help with what?" "With Christmas," he said honestly. "I think I've forgotten how to do it right." She studied him, searching for pretense, finding none. Finally, she stepped aside and let him in. Her home was small, warm, filled with the smell of coffee and something baking. A tiny tree stood in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments. It wasn't impressive. It was alive. They talked, and then they worked. The boxes in Caleb's truck weren't gifts for Anna, as she had feared, but supplies. Food, blankets, toys, all unwrapped and unbranded. He wanted to deliver them anonymously to families in town who were struggling, families Anna knew personally. He didn't want his name attached. He wanted to understand. They drove together, stopping at houses where surprise turned into quiet joy. No cameras, no speeches, just knocking, smiling, leaving. Caleb felt something shift with every stop, a warmth that had nothing to do with heaters or fireplaces. Anna watched him, seeing the man beneath the reputation, the one who was finally listening to the right things. By the time they finished, the sun was high, the town awake. They sat in the truck, exhausted, hands wrapped around cups of coffee. Caleb looked at her, really looked, and understood something simple and profound. She had returned his money not to reject him, but to invite him into a different way of giving. "Thank you," he said. She smiled. "For what?" "For giving me Christmas back," he replied. That afternoon, Caleb returned to his ranch, but it no longer felt like a monument to isolation. It felt like a place that could open outward. He began making changes, quiet ones. He invested in people, not with checks alone, but with presence. He hired locally, listened actively, showed up without announcing himself. The town noticed, slowly, cautiously. Anna never asked for anything. She continued her work, her routines, her steady life. Caleb found reasons to visit town more often, to talk, to help without hovering. Their connection grew naturally, rooted in mutual respect rather than imbalance. Months later, as spring approached, Caleb realized something else. The heart he thought had been empty wasn't broken beyond repair. It had just been waiting for a moment of humility to let the light back in. Christmas hadn't changed him overnight, but it had reminded him who he could be. And it all began when a woman returned every penny he gave, showing him that the richest gifts are the ones that cost nothing but mean everything.